Virus has hit all of us hard, some of us more than others. For today, tens of thousands of people across the nation are grieving the loss of a loved one. Could be a spouse or a friend, could be a child or a brother, could be a parent or a neighbor or coworker. Regardless, the grief has hit us in the midst of the social isolation, making our grief even harder. Because where do you go? Where do you turn to? There's no group of people that you can run to, no person that can hug you, no gathering of the family or church. There's no wake or funeral. And perhaps you weren't even able to be there when your loved one died. What do? How do you make it through? Pivot Family Foundation has produced this series of videos of experts in the field of grief and bereavement to give tips and guidance and wisdom to help you navigate this season, and to remind you of something very simple but very powerful. You are not alone. Though you may feel like you are, you're not. There are people who are with you and who are for you. So thanks for watching, and find encouragement in the days ahead. Yeah, so I think the main thing as I'm hearing you talk is the self-awareness that I'm feeling these things and owning them. So I want to turn a corner here and talk more about, so what do we do with this? Okay, so I'm angry, I'm anxious, I'm grieving, I'm sad. I got all this stuff bundled up in me. Nobody can come to me. I don't have a funeral. I wasn't there when they died. All these separations out there for me.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about a healthy response. How do I get through this until the quarantine is over? What are some things, ideas, strategies I can do to move forward as much as possible in this time frame I'm living in right now?
Okay, well, first, one of the most important things is you have to have an accurate expectation of what your grief and trauma is going to be like and what kinds of expectations you can have of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the problem is, whether during the pandemic or even outside of the pandemic, is that people don't appreciate all that grief and trauma involves. So we need to have accurate information, because if we expect that this is going to be something that we just get through without having many reactions, then we're going to judge ourselves as deficient if we have those reactions. By the same token, if we don't realize that, you know what, even in the aftermath of loss, you can laugh, you can do some things that take you out of your sorrow, and that doesn't mean you're betraying the loved one.
Right.
We need to know that, or else we could be feeling very guilty. So the first thing I would do is to make sure you have an accurate understanding about responses to grief, loss, and trauma. And there will be a list, hopefully, that will be inserted right here of organizations and websites you can go to online. Okay. That do one or both of two things. They give you accurate information about what you can expect in the aftermath of having these kinds of losses. Mm-hmm. And also, several of these websites provide opportunities for you to have online chats or to become part of a blog and have the opportunity to interact with others who are also bereaved. And this can give you the opportunity to have some kind of social connectedness with other bereaved people in a way that can be helpful. Okay. So I would suggest that people look at these websites. They're very legitimate websites. So having an accurate understanding is number one. Number two is to give yourself permission to feel what you're feeling, and then to try to look at constructive ways for coping with it. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned earlier, you may or may not have time to devote as much energy and effort to grieving at this point in time because you're so busy with survival things. Wow. No, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. This will come over time if you set the intention that you're going to pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. I would reach out as much as you can to other people, because you don't right now have the opportunity to have people close around you, but call people, text people, email people, have video chats with people. We need this. This is very important. Recognize you have to put into your life while you're mourning, while you're thinking about the person, the expectation that what we do in grief is to try to find a way to express our feelings in reaction to losing the person, and then to try to make the transition from having them as a physical presence in our life to having a relationship with them in our heart and in our mind.
Right.
We do not have to lose all connection with our loved ones. That's absolutely wrong. We need to, however, change the connections we had from when they were here physically to now being here abstractly and in a sense where we can move forward with them in a healthy way. We want those connections to be healthy and life-affirming, not to be holding us back. Sometimes people think, I'm connected to my loved one by staying in pain. That's not going to be a healthy connection.
Right.
We can move forward with them in many ways to bring them forward in terms of our heart and our mind and in our families as we talk about them and remember them and honor their legacy. So we want to know that. We want to also keep ourselves moving. We feel our grief in our bodies as well as in our psyches. So to whatever extent possible, walk, exercise. If you're stuck inside, do jumping jacks, stretch. Because what we know is that when we lose someone we love, and when it's been in circumstances like this and we're anxious and traumatized, it's held in our bodies and we need to release it. We need to give some channeling to it. So we have to move. We also, I think, have to give ourselves permission to, especially at this point in time when there are other demands, you can't grieve 24/7. And that you have to recognize, you have a process perspective and recognize this is going to be done in bits and pieces. You can't bend your mind around this all at once, particularly in these circumstances.
Right.
So it's going to take time, and we're going to have to move in little bits and pieces. The progression is going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's normal.
Right.
Do not think there's something wrong with you. And we also have to recognize that in the beginning, it might be not even just 1 day at a time. It might be 1 hour at a time, 1 15-minute period at a time. And then we also need to give ourselves breaks. The research shows that people who stay in the grief and mourning and never permit anything positive to come in don't have the ability to continue to go in a healthy fashion over time. I'm not talking about being Pollyanna here. But I'm talking about even in the midst of acute grief, taking the time to back off, to play with the dog, to watch the sunset,
Right.
to find some things to be grateful for, to introduce some positive into this very painful time. The people who do that end up in being able to have a much healthier grief process over time.
Right.
So these are some of the things that I would suggest. And to the extent we can, we have a faith tradition that we can call upon, even if we're upset at our God for this happening. That does not mean that we don't have faith.
Right.
And I would like to add that we can be very upset and we can have a lot of distress, and that doesn't mean that we don't believe in our God. It doesn't mean that we don't believe we'll be reunited someday with our loved one. It just means we're expressing the separation pain and anguish that we're feeling.
Yeah, all those are some excellent insights on this. So I'm thinking, as we think about the short term, those are all good responses right here and now for however many weeks we're in this lockdown type time. Let's think long term. Okay, in a few weeks, everybody's going to be at some point out and about, moving around, visiting, so forth. What are some long-term response that we should look at, begin thinking about as we anticipate getting out of this quarantine time?
Well, first, I think that we need to set the intention that we are going to pay attention to our grief over time.
Okay.
Whether we're able to spend a lot of time with it now or not, we need to promise ourselves that we're going to pay attention to it.
Right.
Because this is a loss that's going to take quite a while to process.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to look for the opportunities to process this.
Mm-hmm.
And that may mean that after the quarantine is lifted, that you get together with people who you were not able to get together with to celebrate the life of your loved one,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to have a memorial, if you will.
Okay.
Just because it's been delayed doesn't mean that we cannot create these opportunities for ourselves.
Very true.
Everyone who has died deserves to be remembered, memorialized. There needs to be a respect paid to them. And every bereaved person needs to have the consolation and support and recognition of social group.
Mm-hmm.
So you may want to ask your friends to come together for a particular time for your ritual that you can create in memory of your loved one.
Right.
You want to pay attention over time to your grief, to recognizing the changes that will come. In the early stages, we cannot bend our mind around this. It happened too suddenly in a crazy world. Yeah. So over time, as we get back into a more normal, whatever that's going to look like, world, it may only be then that some of our loss really becomes apparent to us, and we may actually feel a little worse for a period of time before we feel better. That's normal. That does not mean that you're backsliding. And by the way, if you have any concerns about what's normal and you can't get it from the internet, there are plenty of places at this point in time that are offering services for people, mental health services. And that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. You have been presented with one of the most challenging losses that there can be, a sudden and traumatic death under crazy conditions. And so you can be the healthiest person in the world and still need some help, some assistance, some coaching to get through this. And do not denigrate yourself for that. It's a strong person reaches out for help. The other thing we want to do as we get back into the world is to recognize that people may be so excited about getting back into the world that they might not be paying attention to you. Mm-hmm. You might need to ask for what you need. Mm-hmm. Right? And there have been many people who died in this pandemic, and there will be many more. And you may feel not enough attention is being paid to my loved one and my loss. Right. And you're not a bad person for thinking that, because the worst loss is always my loss. Right. We're the ones who've experienced it.
Exactly right.
And so we need to do what we need to do to pay attention to it. And I think that we need to also move forward and recognize that because perhaps we weren't able to have the time to be with our loved ones at the time of death, or we were not able to have the funeral and so forth, we could look back and feel guilty. And just remember that false guilt meaning guilty, something you really shouldn't feel guilty for, can feel just as genuine as guilt that is extremely legitimate. So just because you feel guilty doesn't in fact mean that you are. And if you're usually we can talk this through with trusted others, but if you're having difficulty with that, definitely talk with a professional or perhaps a trained volunteer, because there are going to be many services that will be available to people in the aftermath of this. Yeah. And I think that we need to recognize the issue is not in getting over as we go on in the long haul, but how do I move forward? How do I keep on keeping on in a healthy way where I recognize who and what I've lost, and I also continue to be as healthily engaged in this life as possible. And it's holding those two dualities as we go forward. Mm-hmm. You don't have to forget the person you've loved and lost, just because you're focusing on trying to move forward. And moving forward doesn't mean that you're betraying the loved one. It means you're doing what you can do after being visited with a loss you didn't ask for. Right. And it's important to keep this perspective that we will get through this. And everybody's been saying this. And you might say, but my world is irrevocably changed. Yes, it has been, and it would be unfair not to recognize that. And I would say that human beings are remarkably resilient,
Right.
even if they have agony and anguish at the beginning. And we know that we've seen that even in modern times. We've seen people who have been dealing with years of war in the Middle East, or people during World War II in London who were bombed on a daily basis.
Oh, yeah.
People are able. People whose families were taken out in the Holocaust. People have suffered horrific tragedies, and we're able to move forward. We are changed. We will have scars, but we are able to move forward. And if you're having difficulty with that, access help. And know that there are ways that even a broken-hearted person can move through this terrible dark night, if you will, and come out the other side. You'll be changed. You'll have scars. You don't have to forget the one you've loved and lost.
Right.
And you can move forward with that person with a healthy connection in your heart and in your mind.
That's so good. I want to ask you to talk to me, for instance, if I were to have a friend or family member who lost a loved one during this time, how would I reach out to them? What would I say or not say, or how should I respond when that happens to a friend of mine if that were to happen at this point?
Well, what we always say is it's your presence that's the most important.
Okay.
Now, right now, physical presence is not possible in most cases.
That's right.
So we have to look for ways actively to be present in ways that are not physical. So we telephone them, we email, text, we video chat with them, we reach out, and we don't leave it upon the bereaved person by saying, oh, well, call me if you want to talk.
Right.
We reach out to them. And if they say at one point they don't want to talk, you come back the next day. You do not give up on them, because some of these people are so traumatized, they're numb, they don't know which end is up. And it's by human connection that we're going to get people through this.
Okay.
And we know that we punish people by taking away human connection. We exile them or put them in solitary confinement or put them in timeouts, because what's happening now is basically what we would usually do when people are being, quote, punished.
Right.
And yet you're not being punished. So what we need to do is to reach into these people. And you can say to them, I don't know what to say. I can only imagine what it must be like. Tell me what it must be like.
Mm-hmm.
And don't think that just because they're not crying, they're not grieving. There are many studies that indicate that you don't have to cry to grieve. Right. It's helpful if you can, but if some people are not wired up that way, give them the opportunity to talk, to reminisce, to look at, well, let me help you plan for what you are going to do when we can get together to honor your loved one's life. And let's strategize for ways that this can happen. So the bottom line of this is to reach in and maintain connection.
Okay, good. In whatever way you can, virtually, in some way, just reach out to them. And the good thing is old-fashioned, but you can still write cards and letters, right?
You absolutely can. Yes.
Yeah, it hasn't gone away for sure. So in closing, just talk to someone that needs some encouragement. Give us some takeaways from today's conversation.
What I would want people to know is that you're heartbroken and traumatized, most probably. Mm. And that's going to leave angry, sadness, confusion, distress, as you're trying to focus on dealing with the everyday life and the demands that's presenting to you at this point in time in the pandemic. At the same time, you're reeling from the loss of your loved one. So understand what you're experiencing, number one.
Mhm.
Permit yourself, to the extent possible at this point in time, to pay attention to it, but give yourself respites from it
Mhm.
in order, though you can keep on going. It's kind of like the marathon runner. If you go all out at the beginning and then you don't take breaks, you don't get to the end of the race. And you may need to back off because of other demands at this point, and that's perfectly okay. Set the intention that you're going to pay attention over time to this. And so that even if it all doesn't get done in the beginning, it'll get done over time as you work to process your feelings of loss of this person and the changes that come in the aftermath of this person not being there in your life anymore. And you try to figure out, and how can I go on in as healthy a fashion as possible with this having occurred? Reach out for other people. Just because right now they might not be physically present doesn't mean that you can't ask for this. It's enough. Look online for information, and if that's not enough, reach out. There are organizations and groups that provide this opportunity to you. This is very difficult. It's very challenging. It's not insurmountable. That people who have dealt with horrific situations before, and this is horrific,
Mhm.
have been able to get through it. They get through it changed, and they get through it with scars, but they can get through it.
Mm.
So know that there is hope,
Yeah.
even though there is loss.
Right. There's another day coming for sure. And so there's no need to give up right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been so good. I appreciate your time and appreciate you investing in us and helping many people to deal with their loss during this traumatic time of quarantine. And like you said, we're going to get through this, and we'll get through it together as much as we possibly can. So again, thank you, Dr. Rando, for your time.
You're welcome.
Thanks for watching this episode. I'm glad you found some encouragement and guidance and wisdom to get you through this season of life. This coronavirus will one day end, so will the quarantine, and you'll be able to reconnect with family and friends and to find some healing from that personal touch of being with them. You can't change the past. It's permanent and it's gone. But you can choose a new future. You can choose to move forward in your life, which is what you've actually done by watching this video. You've taken a step to find healing even in the midst of social isolation. So congratulations to you. I hope you will share this video with others and help them find the encouragement and healing that they need to. Thanks so much.